And obviously we have our main topic, which we'll discuss on every show that we do, which is for today is what is the environmental impact of rainwater harvesting.
So
obviously we know it's environmental benefits, but how much of an impact does it have?
So yeah, there's certainly 4 or 5 things I particularly want to draw to people's attention. I think most people will hopefully know 2 or 3 of these, but hopefully I can share some further light on this. I think the most obvious one, which is one we talk about most on the channel, is to do with the speed of runoff. So this is more to do with stormwater. Of course, rainwater harvesting is very much an element of capturing stormwater. So then it can be reutilized later. So with the rainwater harvesting elements of taking that stormwater runoff, it not only reduces how much flow is going into the network, it also benefits the speed of that discharge. So it helps, of course, with prevention of floods, because we're able to retain some of that water within the tank. Now, with flooding, of course, you generally get erosion, and if it's going from water which is off like pavements and car parks and that sort of stuff, you're going to have potentially oils and fuels and stuff on that land. So that could be washed off and go into contaminate soils as well. So the implementation of rainwater harvesting as kind of like a control layer onto a stormwater defense mechanisms is really one of the standout features of rainwater harvesting to reduce the speed and the volume of water which has been discharged into the ground and to the local storage networks if it's going to like a storm drain, for example. So that's kind of point number 1. Tying nicely into that when we talk about flood prevention, so the speed, it also helps us in terms of droughts. So with rainwater harvesting, of course, if we have the solution in place, that gives us a reservoir of water to tap into when we have a long period of time without rainwater. Whether this be on a domestic level or certainly on a much bigger commercial scale, when we do have droughts, what happens is that we tap into the local reservoirs as a volume, a source of water, and we're pulling all that water out of that reservoir to support the humans in our daily lives. But of course, by pulling all that water out of that reservoir is kind of used by other living organisms, and that will affect their habitat, the fact that we're pulling all that water out of there. So that's really affecting the ecosystem to quite a significant level. So if we can subsidize the rainwater more locally via rainwater harvesting, that is a huge environmental impact, which is not only local to us, but of course it could be global as well. So the idea of rainwater harvesting in droughts, which is the counter argument to, I suppose, flooding, it's kind of like the 2 sides of the table. We have too much water and then we have no water. So in relation to rainwater harvesting for droughts, that is a super way for people to help protect the environments, the ecosystems, and general the natural balance and control of what's going on in nature. So something really important for people to think about. When we generally talk about rainwater harvesting in urban areas, kind of like stormwater again in urban areas. So if you think about a big city, generally when we talk about urban, it's a big city, the built-up developments. We generally have quite a lot of flood prevention devices in place. So we've got these big tall buildings, loads of tarmac and concrete everywhere. That water is then channeling down through into our storm network and then distributed away so we don't have flooding. But alongside of that, within cities, generally you get green spaces where parks, people can go and enjoy the environment. So the addition of rainwater harvesting onto arguably a solution which is already there can have a huge environmental impact, not only for people's well-being, but of course, again, introduction of birds, insects, all that sort of stuff within the city. So again, introducing ecosystems and habitat for other species within areas. So by addition of rainwater harvesting onto stormwater, which is kind of like retention, as I say, a small thing to think about can have super environmental impacts in terms of general habitats for all living things and plants.
Well, you certainly summed that very well. And when we think about the environmental impact that rainwater harvesting has, it's not quite as obvious what it might seem. Obviously, the main one being reducing, especially on a domestic scale, reducing your mains water usage by up to 50%, which is a massive environmental impact.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something else which I'll touch on a bit more. Do you want to say anything further, or I'll jump onto that point?
No, you go jump onto it.
I'll jump onto that point because, of course, with the substitution of using rainwater over mains water, we're very much reducing mains water demand. But of course, the manufacturing process to get that water to basically a very good standard for drinking, so we're getting rid of all the minerals and contaminants and impurities within that water. So there is actually a manufacturing process and a carbon footprint in place to treat that water to get it to a suitable level. So with the introduction of rainwater harvesting, if we can substitute for 50% on a domestic level, commercial applications 80-90%, that is a huge carbon footprint saved for the manufacturing and reprocessing of mains water. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Well,
you're going to build on this now.
I am going to build on it because I found an interesting fact when I was doing research for this. And that's water firms in the UK use around 2% of all of the UK's electricity supply.
Okay.
So obviously, and a large part of that is treating water to a point where it can safely be used in homes for drinking, part of cooking, bathing, showering, all that sort of stuff. But as we mentioned, rainwater harvesting, you can use 50% of it for rainwater instead of mains water. So flushing your toilets, feeding the washing machine, external tap for garden irrigation. So obviously, if you're reducing 50% of the mains water usage, you're potentially, in a way, reducing 50% of the demand of water to be actually repurposed by these water firms.
Yeah, so that's, again, not only in terms of potentially the manoeuvring of that water through pumps and stuff, but it's the electrical demand, the maintenance and servicing. So in terms of financial benefit, there's huge implications on the whole of the network, not of course just in the UK, but globally as well. So rainwater harvesting, to have the opportunity to source water locally to the development, is unbelievably good on a financial basis too. And
yeah, I was trying to build on the point I made earlier. It's like there is, pardon the pun, a trickle-down effect on the environment when it comes to rainwater harvesting. Because I mentioned there with, at the very start, we spoke about it in last week's stormwater session. You can catch that if you missed it, where we talked about how stormwater attenuation is very much part of the water quantity part of studies. And as you mentioned with rainwater harvesting, it can be involved in that. It doesn't solve it, but it can be involved.
Yes.
Because you are collecting the water runoff from roof of the property, garage, all that sort of stuff, channel into the tank rather than going straight down into the storm drain.
Yep.
So you are withholding again a large volume of water from making its way down to potentially causing, erosion of riverbeds further downstream by holding it back and putting it to reuse.
Yes, exactly. For the benefit of not only living plants but the environment as well. So really is a super concept.
That's why my palms there. It's like a trickle down effect. It starts and then all the little benefits should trickle its way down.